Welcome back to Crawford-Clark Close-Up as we continue our James Bond retrospective. In the words of Bernard Lee's M in You Only Live Twice, this is the big one, 007. Yes, we've watched countless rankings of the James Bond movies here on YouTube, and finally it's time to share our ranking of all 25 official Eon releases to date. We won't be including the 1954 or 1967 Casino Royales, or 1983's Never Say Never Again in this list, but suffice it to say they'd all be bringing up the rear of this list were they to feature. The amazing thing about a series like Bond and the devoted fans out there is that no two people's rankings of these films will be identical. For every Casino Royale or Skyfall lover, there will be some who rate Die Another Day as their favourite of the franchise. Yes, really. Let us know your ranking of the movies in the comments below, and as always, this is a subjective list. If your favourite doesn't sit so favourably with us, please be respectful in the comments. We've tried to justify our placing of each film in the list so you get an idea for the tropes we appreciate from the series and those we'd rather do without. Don't forget, if you like this video and you want to know as soon as new content is uploaded, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Come and find us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and look for us on the movie app Letterboxd. We're CC Close-Up. With all that being said, let's jump right into the ranking. We begin at number 25 with a film that, had you told me when I first saw it back in 2015 that it would be the bottom of my list, I'd never have believed you. But with subsequent repeat viewings, SPECTRE is an almighty slog to sit through. Coming after the superbly paced and reinvigorating Skyfall, Craig's fourth outing commits the biggest sin going for an action-adventure. It's unutterably dull. Next to nothing of any interest happens here. The colour palette alone feels washed out, particularly during the pre-titles Day of the Dead festivities in Mexico City, whose visuals should pop from the screen. Craig gives a solid turn, as always, as 007, though you can tell that something is a little off. He seems to be playing a very different version of Bond than he's done in his previous three missions, almost a little too cocksure for his own good. There are some solid sequences. Bond reunited with Mr. White in an atmospheric hut by a lake in Austria works well, as do some of the moments with Dave Bautista's physically imposing hinks, but so much of the rest of the screen time feels like wasted potential on so many accounts, none more so than with Christoph Waltz as arch-enemy Blofeld. The relationship between Bond and Madeleine Swann is never properly formed, and she quickly becomes the damsel in distress in the pantomime finale in the rigged-for-demolition MI6. There are tiny flourishes of something good from returning composer Thomas Newman, but most of the score feels like it's cheating the audience, as it's recycled material from the superior Skyfall. The Bond and Blofeld foster-brother link is still ludicrous, and the film just feels very flat overall. At 24, we have Progress. Connery's final outing as Bond, Diamonds Are Forever, was always dead last in my ranking, and whilst it's progressed up the list, it's unlikely to ever get any higher than this. Much like with Spectre succeeding the superior Skyfall, Diamonds does every disservice it can to the existence of the brilliant On Her Majesty's Secret Service. From the lackluster gun barrel and zany pre-titles with Bond punching and strangling people to track down Blofeld, you know you're in for a weird ride, and Diamonds is certainly that. The biggest missed opportunity not to have Lazenby back for a direct sequel to Majesty's, where he's hunting down Blofeld. Jill St. John's Tiffany Case has to be one of the most inept Bond girls in the canon. Wint and Kidd are initially intriguing but quickly irritating side characters, and let's not dwell on Jimmy Dean's monstrous Willard White. The film has such a cheap look about it after the opulence of the 60s Bond adventures. Whether that's simply down to the fact that we get fewer exotic locations this time around, I don't know, but it just doesn't equate to a memorable experience. The best thing going for Diamonds is Shirley Bassey's killer theme and John Barry's charismatic score. Next up, we return to the still current incumbent of the role, Daniel Craig, and his second film, Quantum of Solace. Coming as the first direct sequel in the series to the mighty Casino Royale, it was always going to be a challenge to top such a perfect origin story for the character. This is the shortest film in the series to date, but it rarely feels like it, with meandering dialogue and action sequences that feel as if they do little to enhance the story. Jack White and Alicia Keys' first Bond duet in the series is forgettable, as is the title design. The plot is largely non existent, and there's too much inspiration taken from the Bourne movies to ensure that Bond is both gritty and violent. There's little fun to be had with this drab movie, despite Bond going to more different locations in this film than in any other adventure. Camille, however, is an intriguing Bond girl, and the scene where Bond confronts Yusuf, Vesper's boyfriend, is some of Craig's most authentic acting during his tenure, but it's not enough to engage me. At 22, we've Roger Moore's debut as Bond in Live and Let Die. This is another surprise for me, as I've always held this film in generally high regard, but the more I've seen it in subsequent years, the more fatigued and disinterested I find myself in the story. It's an interesting premise to open the story with no sign of Bond, but a string of murders of fellow British agents. The film also boasts a dynamic score from one-time composer George Martin and a contender for Best Theme Song from Paul McCartney and Wings, as well as the visually striking titles from Maurice Binder. Roger Moore is the English gentleman Bond, and it's actually a refreshing change after both Lazenby and Moore's personifications of the character. Moore's films certainly don't take themselves too seriously, and this is evident throughout. We get little time with the MI6 regulars in this instalment, no sign of Desmond Llewellyn's Q for the only time during his 36-year run on the series, but we do get the brilliant David Hedison as Felix Leiter in his first run as the character. There are a number of parallels between Connery's debut Dr. No and this, Bond being taken for a ride, Quarrel Jr., a double-crossing woman working with the villain. We also get to see Bond's home in both installments. It's a comfortable, if unremarkable, debut for Moore. At 21, we bookend Moore's era with his final outing in the role in A View to a Kill. Once again, the film boasts a top score from John Barry, weaving the main melody of Duran Duran's A View to a Kill throughout, but the fact is, Moore looks far too old to be convincing as a secret agent. The stunt doubles are so blatant, especially in the early Paris scenes, and the action feels a little pedestrian. The film does earn brownie points for the villainous pairing of Max Zorin and Mayday, played with vivacity by Christopher Walken and Grace Jones. Zorin is certainly the most psychotic of all Bond foes to date, particularly when nonchalantly gunning down his workmen in the mine during the finale. The plot, monopolising the microchip market, feels awfully reminiscent of Goldfinger's Operation Grand Slam, even down to the meeting with the men to explain the plan. There are some interesting set pieces in the film, the City Hall fire being one of the most effective, and Bond and Zorin going head to head atop the Golden Gate Bridge is a solid Bond finale, but it all feels a little too generic 14th time around. Also, the less said about the late Tanya Roberts Bond girl Stacey Sutton, the better. Kicking off the top 20, we've a film that most Bond fans wouldn't hesitate to put at the very bottom of their ranking. Whilst it's far from top-tier Bond, there's still a fair amount to enjoy about Die Another Day. This was the first Bond to take a real leap in trying something different for some time, by having Bond fail a mission and be captured and tortured. Granted, the torture is glorified over Daniel Kleinman's credits and Madonna's Dirge theme song, but it's a surprising opening for the 40th anniversary Bond. The first half of the film, in fact, is pretty solid. It's only when Bond makes it to Iceland that things take a dramatic nosedive. Whilst Halle Berry is a beautiful woman, she's not at all a convincing Bond girl, and certainly not an equal to Bond. The homage to Ursula Andress notwithstanding, the dialogue given to the character is so cringe-worthy. Toby Stephens plays pompous surprisingly well as Gustav Graves, but it's a fairly forgettable villain. It's the abundance of CGI and the kite surfing on the tsunami that really set this movie apart for all the wrong reasons. A decidedly mixed bag with enough to recommend in the first half, but sadly plenty to cancel out the good in the second and third acts. At 19, we have another Moore entry, The Man with the Golden Gun. Certainly not the train wreck that some would have you believe. There are some great moments in Golden Gun, with Christopher Lee playing the titular, pun intended, antagonist to perfection, as well as Moore giving another dependable performance. Yes, you've the clumsy Mary Goodnight, the wasted Maud Adams as ill-fated Andrea, a bizarre karate sequence, and the return of Sheriff J.W. Pepper, but you've also got a playful John Barry score, Chew Me, and a villain's island to die for. If I'm in the mood for a check your brain at the door Bond adventure, this disc will be going in. Number 18 is Pierce Brosnan's third outing in the role, The World Is Not Enough. This holds a place in this Bond fan's heart as the first of the films I saw on its actual release in cinemas back in 1999, the year I properly understood just how fantastic James Bond was. The film boasts a terrific pre-title sequence, the longest in the series until the newest release, No Time to Die, another great score from David Arnold, and the brilliant Sophie Marceau as femme fatale Electra King. This is also the last time we see Desmond Llewellyn's stalwart Q in a bittersweet final scene. Overall, this is a much more character-driven narrative than we're necessarily used to in this series. Robert Carlyle's Victor Zokas, Renard, had promise on paper, but the execution feels a little lackluster, and Denise Richards is the gorgeous but utterly redundant Dr. Christmas Jones. Once Bond has killed Electra, the finale is also one of the most boring in recent times. At 17, we're back with Roger Moore and his penultimate adventure, Octopussy. From the outset, the pre-titles action promises great spectacle and intrigue, and large chunks of the film as a whole are solidly entertaining. The assassination of 009 by Mishka and Grishka is an atmospheric sequence. Bond and Fanning at Sotheby's with the Fabergé egg and the double sixes, fancy that, are fun sequences, and we get to see Bond in exotic India for the first and only time in the series to date. Robert Brown acquits himself well as the new M, replacing the hard-to-replace late Bernard Lee. Stephen Burkoff is perfectly flamboyant as bent Russian General Orlov, and Vijay provides another resourceful ally to Bond. Moore also gets to have Maud Adams as his leading lady this time as Octopussy, and she has a far meatier role than she had in The Man with the Golden Gun. Their relationship seems plausible, and it's effective on screen. The film does drag a little in places, and then from the circus scene to the finale, with Kamal and Gobinda in the plane, the film seems to shoot by without a moment's breath. Octopussy is ultimately perfectly average Bond fare. In at 16, we have Connery's fourth outing, Thunderball, a film that I've always wanted to enjoy more than I actually do. There's plenty of promise here, exotic locales, stunning women, Connery on his most charismatic form in the role through his whole tenure, and plenty of action, but something still feels a little off this time around. Having directed both Dr. No and From Russia with Love, Terence Young returned for his third and final film, and it feels like he's run out of steam about halfway through the picture. Some of the editing choices are a little unusual. The abundance of underwater action, whilst an impressive feat for 1965, do little to keep this viewer engaged, and it feels much longer than it needs to be. The stakes are certainly higher in this film, and the budget is well spent on screen. Adolfo Celli is underrated as Emilio Largo, Luciana Paluzzi is an absolute standout as Fiona Volpe, and Claudine Auger is extremely easy on the eye as Domino, but Connery feels like he's flagging a little at times, and this is really the first time you start to notice this during his films. The emphasis is on technology and spectacle, and for me, it's another mixed bag. Number 15 will probably be a surprise to most, as You Only Live Twice is widely regarded as the point at which Sean Connery has entirely lost interest in the character that made his name, but the fifth Bond adventure has plenty of spectacle and it's enjoyable for the most part. We get an elaborate Death of 007 opening, Bond seen for the first time in the series in naval uniform, a stunning score from John Barry and title song from Nancy Sinatra, and Bond in Japan for the first and only time to date in the series. Tanaka and Aki are two of Bond's best allies from the early films. Ken Adams' volcano set is extraordinary, and we finally get a full reveal of arch-enemy Ernst Stavro Blofeld. We do, of course, get the questionable moment of Bond becoming Japanese, but that aside, this is an assured fifth adventure. For number 14, we go to perhaps the most generic film in the series, Brosnan's second, Tomorrow Never Dies. We get some entertaining balls-to-the-wall action from the outset in the terrorist arms bazaar sequence, one of the series' best, most dynamic scores from debut Bond composer David Arnold, and some inventive action sequences. Brosnan feels more confident as Bond second time around, and Michelle Yeoh is a welcome addition to the series as Wei Lin. The only real weak link is Jonathan Pryce's hammy villain Elliot Carver, but all being said, this is a solid follow-up to GoldenEye. Ask me when I first started getting into Bond where I would have ranked Moonraker, and chances are it would have been bottom 3. The more I watch the film, I enjoy it for the travelogue and spectacle it is. Yes, it is outrageous, and there are some truly ridiculous things here. Jaws returning and falling in love, Bond in space, Bond fighting off the villain's pet python, the gondola across St. Mark's Square, but equally there's a lot to take away from Moonraker if you're prepared to give it a chance. Moore actually gives another solid performance. Michael Lonsdale is suitably sadistic and loquacious as Drax. Lois Charles as Holly Goodhead gives as good as she gets, and the model work for the space sequences is fantastic. The centrifuge sequence and Corinne going to the dogs are also two of the most impressive moments during Moore's Bond tenure. At number 12, we go right up to date with No Time to Die, Daniel Craig's fifth and certainly final Bond adventure, but we'll get to that. After the many delays in production for the 25th film and coming after the lackluster Spectre, it was a relief to finally get to see Craig's finale in the fall of 2021. The revamped gun barrel design launches us straight into a flashback sequence told through the eyes of a young Madeline Swan when an intruder breaks into the family home looking for her father, Mr. White. After killing Madeline's mother, Madeline shoots him, but soon realizes he is still alive, so he makes chase for her across the frozen lake. It's a creepy, highly effective opening, and the first since the early Moore movies not to feature Bond for at least the first 5 minutes. Bond and Madeline in Matera is beautiful, and the DB5 chase is a real highlight of the film. From there on, No Time to Die is a decidedly mixed bag. Craig's Bond is far more loquacious fifth time around, and I think realising that they need to go for broke to pull off this finale. Ana de Armas's Paloma is another refreshing highlight in the first act of the film, as is seeing Bond enjoying retirement in the spiritual home of Bond and his author, Jamaica. Lashana Lynch's Know Me is not nearly fleshed out enough as the new 007 since Bond's retirement, and the back and forth between the two of them feels a little cheesy. Ralph Fiennes' M being implicated more within the plot this time around is a good thing, and Q and Moneypenny, whilst having significantly less to do than in the previous two films, still stand as solid allies for Bond. The villains are where the film greatly suffers. Christoph Waltz's incarcerated Blofeld, pulling the strings from Belmarsh and sowing seeds of doubt in Bond, is an interesting premise, but one that never feels satisfying. Moreover, his sudden death at the hands of Bond feels like a complete waste of resurrecting such an important character in the Bond canon. Rami Malek's Safin shows great promise early in the film, adorned with no mask, and also when he later visits an older Madeline in her office, but his intentions are never truly fleshed out, making him a very one-dimensional threat. The nods to We Have All the Time in the World, written specifically for Majesties, are also woven well into Hans Zimmer's score, but playing the whole track over the end credits is still frustrating. We're assuming you've now seen No Time to Die, particularly if you're watching this ranking video, but spoiler warning just in case. Craig's iteration of Bond is killed at the close of the film, and everything leading up to this sacrifice still doesn't sit well with me. Craig's Bond certainly has one of the most tragic arcs of any version of Bond, and it just seems like they went for the bold statement to end his tenure in the role just to be daring. We're edging closer to our favourite 10 Bond adventures, but at 11, we turn to a film that set the template for exactly what Bond stands for: Goldfinger. Mini pre-titles mission superfluous to the main plot? Tick. Maniacal villain with a master plan and physical sidekick? Tick. Suave, quick-witted protagonist? Tick. Sensational theme song? Tick. Goldfinger is the prime example of a tick-the-boxes Bond. Why then is it only at number 11 in our ranking? Simply put, the elements are there, but there are more engaging Bond films. The film feels as if it's playing it safe for the most part. It knows what it's trying to achieve, and there's no room for modifications. There are so many classic elements: the Aston Martin DB5, Jill painted gold, Odd Job's hat, No Mr. Bond, I Expect You to Die, Pussy galore, yet Connery's Bond is actually pretty useless this time around. He gets caught numerous times, it takes him a long stretch of the runtime to discover the villain's plan, and there's no real sense of intrigue or mystery that you got from both Dr. No and from Russia with Love preceding it. Kicking off our top 10, we turn to the first of the two Timothy Dalton Bond adventures, The Living Daylights. From the action-packed opener, which sees the new 007 introduced brilliantly mid-training exercise on the Rock of Gibraltar, this is a refreshing new take on James Bond after 12 years and 7 more outings. Aha provide a great title song. John Barry produces his final score for the series, and he saved one of his best for last. And Dalton is so assured in his debut. The villains and the third act action are the weaker elements of the film, but everything from Koskos' fake defection, Saunders' death, Bond and Kara's escape from Bratislava is all superb, and the film feels like the best paced in a few years. As highlighted in our Greatest Bond Moments video, the sequence where Bond interrogates John Rhys Davies Pushkin in the hotel room is one of the finest moments in the series, and the relationship between Bond and his leading lady, Mariam Darbo's Cara Milovi, also feels very unique within the series. The Living Daylights is overall a brilliant Bond debut. For number 9 in our ranking, we return to the humble beginnings of the series with Dr. No. There's urgency and excitement as the white dots flit across the screen and the gunshot echoes onto a kaleidoscopic world of colour and intrigue. This film includes Bond's never-beaten introduction at the Shamanda Fair table, Honey Rider's emergence from the ocean, Quarrel as one of Bond's most loyal allies, the mysterious Dr. No played with relish by Joseph Wiseman, and Jamaica as the prime location. It's a stripped-back, simple story for Bond's debut, but it works. Bond gets his trademark Walther PPK. He shoots Professor Dent in cold blood. We first hear of Organisation SPECTRE. There's so much crammed into an hour and 45 minutes, but the film has one of the best 3-act structures in the series. I always find the next 2 placings in my ranking difficult as I go back and forth on which of these I prefer, but for now, my second favourite Moore outing is For Your Eyes Only. We start off with possibly the best gun barrel in the series, before seeing Bond visiting Tracy's grave in a lovely bit of continuity across actors in the series. The rest of the pre-titles action is a little hammy, as Bond manages to one-up a bald man in a wheelchair who contractually can't be referred to as Blofeld, though we know he's clearly meant to be, complete with White Pussycat, before launching into Maurice Binder's titles and the underrated Sheena Easton theme song. Moore is on top form throughout, playing it much straighter than before and completely comfortable, and crucially, still believable in the role of a British secret agent. Carol Bouquet has to be one of the most stunning women to have played a Bond girl, and her conflicted Melina Havelock is one of the series' best. The relationship between she and Moore's Bond comes across well on screen. Topol, as Milos Colombo, is one of the best allies to Bond since Draco in Majesties. Villain henchman Locke provides us with a fantastic death sequence that's up there as one of the best Bond moments, and I'm going to say it, I love Bill Conti's summery sounding score. Once again, the villain aspect lets things down a little, with Christatos proving one of the least effective villains for a few films, and Bibi Dull is an entirely redundant character. Otherwise, there's plenty of Fleming moments mined for this straighter espionage thriller. Just pipping eyes only in 007's spot, we have The Spy Who Loved Me. Kicking off with the extraordinary pre-title stunt with the Union Jack parachute, the sky's the limit for the 10th Bond adventure. Moore gives his most relaxed and assured performance as 007. Maurice Binder brings his A-game with the title design, accompanied by Carly Simon's now anthemic Nobody Does It Better, and the film boasts the most intimidating henchman in the whole series, with the late, great Richard Keel's Jaws. Barbara Bach is a great female lead as Major Anya Amasova, and the action and spectacle, particularly on the enormous Liparis tanker set, is fantastic. If you're looking for a film to show a first-timer to the series, you can't go wrong with Spy. Time to delve deeply into its treasures. Just missing out on our top 5, we have the comeback after laying 6 years dormant due to legal action at MGM. Brosnan's debut, GoldenEye, was the Bond for the 90s, reinvigorated, exotic, action-packed, and exciting. From Daniel Kleinman's glossy 3D new gun barrel and Brosnan's confident pose, we're in for a treat. The villainous ensemble really stand out here, with Xenia, Oromov, and of course ally-turned-enemy Alec Yanis Trevelyan proving more than a match for Bond. We have Judi Dench and Samantha Bond making their debuts as M and Moneypenny respectively, and the first appearance for Robbie Coltrane's charismatic Valentin Zukovsky. The leading lady is Natalia Simonova, given great spunk by Isabella Scorupco, despite spending most of the film in a horrendous costume, and the action and effects work, particularly for the Seven-Eye Blast, is brilliant. GoldenEye, the film and the game, have really stood the test of time, and it's fair to say that the success of the 17th Bond was a gamble. 007 had been off screen for 6 years, and there was no guarantee that audiences still had a hankering after the secret agent. GoldenEye proved that, even with the irritating Boris Grishenko, after 33 years, you can still depend on one man. We head straight into our top 5 with a film that most fans would rate highly. This reviewer even had this as my number 1 at one point. It's the strongest of the Connery Bond movies, From Russia with Love. The strongest in that it feels most like a Cold War thriller in the tone of Fleming's novels. The pre-titles tease of the death of 007, which is really a training exercise for Robert Shaw's Donald Grant, sets things up well as we launch into Robert Brownjohn's hypnotic title design, accompanied by a bombastic orchestration of both Matt Monro's title track and the legendary James Bond theme. Connery is on fantastic form here, as are his supporting cast. The late Pedro Armendariz is the finest Bond ally, Kerim Bey. Tatiana Romanova is one of the most beautiful Bond girls, and the villainous lineup is one of the very best in the series, Lotte Lenya perfectly characterizing Fleming's Rosa Klebb from the pages of the novel. The film oozes class and sophistication, and it's ultimately a more confident film than Dr. No from all involved on the production, despite the production falling into chaos a number of times and almost not being ready in time for its October 1963 release. Everything from the chess scene to Bond swooning Moneypenny, from Klebb recruiting Grant to the action on the Orient Express, this is an essential film in the series, and one that still holds up remarkably well. At 4, we come to George Lazenby's solo entry in the series. Blame those closest to him at the time of the film's release for convincing him not to continue in the role with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Widely regarded these days amongst the fandom as one of the gems of the series, Majesty's has absolutely everything you could want in a Bond movie. High-octane action, killer one-liners, a strong leading lady, an intimidating villain with a sinister plot, and most of all, heart. Yes, this is the movie where Bond finally actually falls in love and learns the hard way that he can never have the luxury of settling down. This is John Barry's finest score in the series. The love theme from Louis Armstrong is one of the most beautiful songs ever written, and director Peter Hunt's editing is tight. The film is paced so perfectly that it blends seamlessly from one scene to the next, and George Lazenby is terrific in his one outing as Bond, lending the character well-needed pathos and fallibility that's always been there in Fleming's books. The film has such a regal look about it, with deep purple being a striking colour, and it's the perfect film to watch, particularly at this festive time of year. The film has certainly grown in popularity over the 5 decades since its original release, and I had the joy of sitting in an audience in London with many fans and Lazenby himself to watch a 4K print of the film in 2019 for the 50th anniversary. In third place, we have Daniel Craig's blistering debut, Casino Royale. From the black and white opening where James obtains his license to kill with the 2 kills, this is the perfect origin story for the character and a well-needed refresh of the series after the excess of Die Another Day. Craig proved the naysayers wrong by turning in one of the most confident Bond debuts so far. His Bond is fallible, he bruises, he bleeds, he's rough around the edges, he doesn't handle authority well. He's the perfect anti-hero. Dame Judi Dench makes a welcome return as the only original member of MI6 to return to the Bond fold following the Brosnan movies, and the scenes between M and Bond bristle with tension. Director Martin Campbell has now successfully seen in two separate actors to the world of Bond, and clearly knows how to make a lasting entry in the series. Casino Royale is riveting, from the free running right the way to the sinking house in Venice. Mads Mikkelsen is inspired casting as villain Le Chiffre. Jeffrey Wright makes for a great Felix Leiter. Mathis is brought to life brilliantly from Fleming's novel, but the standout is Ava Green as the enigmatic Vesper. The chemistry between Green and Craig is magic, and the softer moments between the two of them are real highlights from the whole series. Plus, of course, Ava Green is stunning. For many modern-day fans, and indeed fans of old, you can't get much better than Casino Royale. But for me, there's two more films that just pip it to the post for overall enjoyment. With some Bond releases, it's just serendipitous, and the stars align for something perfect. And the 50th anniversary, 2012, was the year of the London Olympics, Bond skydiving with Her Majesty the Queen, and the highly anticipated release of Skyfall. Skyfall really has it all: the action, the amazing cast, Javier Bardem, Naomi Harris, Ben Whishaw, Bernice Marlowe, even the late Albert Finney. It utilises London better than ever before. It's a deeply personal story for Bond, and puts Dame Judi Dench front and centre of the narrative. Director Sam Mendes, initially very against the idea of Craig becoming Bond for Casino Royale, saw what everyone else saw, and 4 years on was convinced by the man himself to helm the 23rd film in the series, and you can tell that the film is in accomplished hands. One of the most striking aspects of Skyfall is Roger Deakins' masterful cinematography, with colours popping from the screen, particularly in the Shanghai and Macau sequences, and the desolation of Skyfall Lodge on the backdrop of the Scottish moors lends a foreboding quality to the final act of the film. If you've seen our Greatest Bond Villains video on the channel, you'll know that Javier Bardem's Tiago Rodriguez, Silva, is our favourite, and he gives an incredible performance here, from that opening monologue to the confrontation with M in the church on the moors. He's creepy, he's intimidating, he's calculating, he's disfigured, he's everything and more that you want from a Bond antagonist, and he and Craig's Bond make a beautiful pairing. Adele's Oscar-winning theme song for the film is also a triumph, and paved the way for future Academy Award success for the series. This is, without a doubt, the best experience I've had so far sitting in the cinema on opening night, lights down, ready for a new Bond. So, 24 films down, only our number one to go. If you're a fan of the series and you've made it this far, you know what's coming. But to be fair, even if you've not seen all of these films, but you've watched most of our Bond retrospective videos on the channel, you'll still know what's coming. My number one favourite James Bond movie is Licence to Kill. Really, it is. The reason I say that is because I so rarely see any love at all for the Timothy Dalton Bond movies. In fact, in many ranking videos, people don't seem to know where to place his two outings, so they often get placed together in the middle of the pack, and sometimes despairingly at the end. Dalton's portrayal of the character may not be for everyone, but in my mind, this is the closest we've ever got to Fleming's Bond of the books, leaping out of the page onto the screen. With Dalton, it seems so effortless. He is the agent filled with acidity, the reluctant spy, there to get the job done with no messing around. That's not to say that Dalton doesn't get to have fun with the role, because he certainly does. The supporting cast are fantastic here. Desmond Llewellyn finally gets the most to do of any of the films in the series, and works so naturally with Dalton. Robert Davi is outstanding as Fran Sanchez, vicious from his very introduction. A very young Benicio del Toro is terrific as Dario. David Hedison returns after 16 years to the role of Felix. Frank McRae is a fab, though far too short-lived ally, and the film boasts two of the most gorgeous women to appear in the series: Carrie Lowell and Talisa Soto as resourceful Pam Bouvier and villain's girlfriend Lupe Lamora. Many berate License to Kill for its emphasis on violent action and its distinctly 80s feel, but it's merely a product of its time, and it's a great precursor to the Daniel Craig movies. Dalton himself stated in interviews that the further out on a limb you go with the character, the more exciting it is, and License to Kill has me gripped from beginning to end. Some of the action may be a little hard-hitting, but there are lighter moments to help balance this out, and for me this is the most invested I am in the character of Bond and his personal mission to avenge Felix and Della by infiltrating Sanchez's organisation. Perhaps objectively this isn't the best of the films, but this is ultimately my go-to film starring my favourite Bond actor. License to Kill is charming, delves deep into story elements from Fleming, and is one of the most entertaining, driven, and ahead of its time films in the series. So that's my personal list, best to worst, of the Bond movies to date, as the series hits the incredible Diamond Year milestone. Let us know your ranking of the movies in the comments below, and keep the British end up for the Bond community, as we're generally one of the coolest fan communities out there, and we're respectful of one another's opinions. If you enjoyed this video, please consider clicking subscribe at the top of the page to ensure you don't miss out on new content as soon as we upload. Come and find Crawford-Clark Close-Up on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and you can find us on the movie app Letterboxd. Search CC Close-Up. The James Bond retrospective isn't over yet, as in the new year we'll be celebrating 70 years of the Fleming novels by ranking our favourites, as well as any other video suggestions you may have, which you can also leave in the comments. Thanks for watching, and until next time, that's a wrap.